British foods don't always stay British once they reach America. Some change completely, while others stay surprisingly true to their roots. From fish and chips that were protected during wartime rationing, to Cornish pasties finding a second home in Michigan. Today, we're looking at 4 iconic British foods and what happened to them once they crossed the Atlantic. So let's start with the sandwich. Now, no one here is claiming that bread is British. The sandwich, however, is, at least by name. In 18th century Britain, John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, famously asked for meat tucked between slices of bread so that he could keep playing cards without having to stop to eat. And although lots of cultures had bread with fillings long before this moment is what gave the sandwich the name that we still use today. By the 19th century, the sandwich had made its way to America with British settlers, and it quickly evolved into completely new forms. Over here, you'll find sandwiches that you'd almost never see in the UK, like the Fluffernutter, a New England speciality made with peanut butter and marshmallow fluff, or the Philly cheesesteak, a Philadelphia classic loaded with sliced steak and melted cheese. And then, of course, the American classic PB&J. And funnily enough, Brits can thank America for subs and hoagies, with Subway coming over to the UK in 1996 and hoagies having an interesting story involving Italian immigrants working at the Hog Island shipyard in Philadelphia. But it doesn't just stop with the fillings. Many mass-produced breads in America are a lot sweeter, and this is something I noticed as soon as I moved here. Many Brits compare American bread to cake. I wouldn't go that far, but I can taste the difference in sweetness. And that's due to added sugar and things like corn syrup. The texture and shelf life also changes significantly because of this and with the use of additives, preservatives, and emulsifiers. Both the UK and US use them in bread, but American loaves generally contain more, with some being banned in the UK and EU, while others are more tightly regulated. Now, no one can claim who invented bread. Humans have been grinding grains for tens of thousands of years, and the earliest confirmed evidence of actual bread making comes from a 14,000-year-old site in Jordan. So bread itself is ancient, and the sandwich has a very British name. But once it crossed the Atlantic, America really put its own spin on it. Then we have pasties, which is one of those foods that feels very British, but they actually come from one specific part of Britain, Cornwall. They were originally made for Cornish tin miners, with the thick crimped edge acting as a handle. So this was so it could be held with dirty hands and then just thrown away. Warm, filling, high in calories, and portable. Basically the perfect underground meal. In the 19th century, Cornish miners took the pasty with them when they moved to the mining regions of Michigan. And that's where the American version began. The pasty became so established that it's still celebrated today with bakeries, traditions, and even festivals. What's interesting is that the American pasty is actually very close to the traditional Cornish one. The classic filling, beef, potato, onion, and sweet. It's almost identical, and the overall shape has stayed the same too. Any differences tend to be small things like crimping style or pastry thickness, which vary from bakery to bakery rather than being a totally different version. We're planning to visit Michigan next year, and I honestly can't wait to try one and compare it to the Cornish original. It's a great example of a British food traveling across the world, yet staying surprisingly true to its roots. Now onto a proper British classic, fish and chips. Even though we think of it as the traditional British dish, the first fish and chip shop didn't actually appear until around 1860 in London's East End, and it was opened by a Jewish immigrant. It wasn't the beer battered style we have today, but fried fish, Jewish style, was well known. There's also a Lancashire claim to the first fish and chip shop opening around the same time, So depending on who you ask, either the North or the South got there first. Either way, the combination took off. Fish and batter were cheap, chips were quite literally cheap as chips, and the whole meal could be cooked in minutes, which made it an instant hit. By the time that we reached the First and Second World Wars, fish and chips were so important to morale that the government actually protected the supply. It was one of the very few foods that was never rationed, which only cemented it as a national favourite even more. In the UK, we usually stick to cod or haddock with salt and vinegar, and maybe some mushy peas and a pot of curry sauce, or maybe gravy. In the US though, there is usually more choice when it comes to fried fish, but the biggest difference is the chips. Most places serve a form of fries, and while some restaurants do offer thick cut chips, in the UK that is the standard. When I was younger, we used to take a Mars bar to the local chippy and get it battered for 50p. I have no idea if you can do that in America, so if you've seen it here or a version of the Mars bar getting battered at a chip shop, let me know in the comments. And finally, our last classic, the Yorkshire pudding. Yorkshire puddings are about as British as it gets. In the UK, they are a Sunday roast essential, originally called dripping puddings. So in the 18th century, they were called this because the batter was cooked under roasting meat to catch the fat and make the ingredients go further. Then in 1747, a cookbook was published with the first recipe under the name Yorkshire pudding. And that's pretty much where the version we know today started. And back in Britain, you've also got toad in the hole, which comes from the same idea of stretching meat by baking it in Yorkshire pudding batter. Early versions even used mutton or pigeon before sausages became the standard in the 20th century. When English settlers brought the idea to America, the batter evolved in a few different directions. First, you've got popovers, which are much taller, lighter versions served in all sorts of ways, even as a breakfast option and sometimes made with butter. Then there's the Dutch baby, which the New York Times once compared to a Yorkshire pudding, sparking a mini uproar in the UK, especially because the article showed that it was topped with powdered sugar and jam. But the batter is almost identical, it's really just cooked differently. So while Yorkshire puddings stayed firmly savoury in Britain, the same basic batter grew into a handful of similar and totally different dishes once it crossed the Atlantic. So let me know in the comments, which style of food you prefer, the British classic or the American twist? Thank you for watching, and a huge thank you to my channel members.